everyone. My name is Taylor, and I will be moderating today for our class on spring garden prep. We have Dan Alexander today as our presenter with a whole multitude of plants and fun, different kinds of things to talk about how you prep your garden for spring, as well as Jen behind the camera. And so we will be going through a whole presentation, answering some questions at the end. And I invite everyone to come join us for these live presentations from our website, Slow Gardens, as well as check out all the other stuff we have on our YouTube page. But with that, I'm going to pass it over to Dan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Taylor. And thanks to Jen for being behind the camera. And Jen's mascot, George, is wandering around the office here. So we'll have to keep an eye on him. Thanks for coming, everybody. You can see I'm surrounded here by colorful flowers, which is symbolic of spring. More than symbolic, it's what spring's about. And so we're going to talk about some of this stuff that's in front of us. We're going to talk about soils and soil preparation and what to grow now and what to grow later. And hopefully have time for lots of questions for the end. And Taylor, feel free to interrupt me if things are unclear or if people have a bunch of questions about something. I don't mind being interrupted at all. I can lose my place anytime and never find it again. I want to direct you to the resources that I put in the outline. They're at the bottom of the outline. I hope you've been able to find that on the website. I really strongly urge everyone to find an old copy of the Sunset Western Garden book. It hardly matters which edition you get. There are lots and lots of them available at the used book sites on the web for very reasonable prices. And it's just a fabulous resource for Bay Area gardening. Other areas of the country aren't as lucky to have had Lane Publishing right in our backyard, and unfortunately they're not publishing any longer, but it is an absolutely indispensable resource, and we'll tell you all about the sunset zones, climate zones, which are much more detailed than the U.S. Department of Agriculture zones, which are very gross in their and what they encompass. And the sunset zones are broken down into much, much smaller microclimates and will be very helpful to you in doing all kinds of Bay Area gardening. I also want to let you know that Pam Pierce has a new edition of her wonderful book about Bay Area vegetable gardening. This is the new 30th anniversary edition of Golden Gate Gardening, and it has a lot of expanded materials that's relevant to areas outside of her original book, which really dealt with San Francisco and its immediate environs. But this deals with climates that are more relevant to Contra Costa County, to maybe southern San Mateo County, Santa Clara County, and can be very helpful if you're going to grow vegetables, as I hope most of you might do. And we'll talk a little bit about vegetable gardening today, but the focus here is really sort of overall preparation for spring gardening. Our climate here in the Bay Area is what we call a dry summer, wet winter, or Mediterranean climate. So we have very distinct rainy seasons and dry seasons. We have a mild winter. We have a variable summer. Some parts of the Bay Area are quite hot. Some parts are cooler. And so we have many, many, many microclimates and different kinds of areas that we deal with in our gardens. And so what you are doing in your east-facing garden in Contra Costa County can be very different than what somebody in a north-facing garden in Marin County is doing in their garden. So we'll try to kind of talk broadly here today, realizing that your individual circumstance is going to be unique to your garden, and try to, give principles that can be applied everywhere. We had a rough winter this year in a sense, a lot of storms, some big winds, some landslides, that sort of thing. As the weather gets better, it's an opportunity for you to go out and assess what's happened out there. The first thing really that we want to do in the garden is to fix things that got broken. George. We want to look at the trees, especially the big landscape trees that are, a valuable structure for your landscape, and look for broken branches, look for dead branches, and do some spring pruning, either yourself or have somebody come in and do it, so that you have a sound structure left over. You don't want what in the old days we would have called widowmakers hanging around on your trees. They can fall down and bonk somebody on the head. And you don't want broken, jagged branches in your big mature trees that will be places where fungus and bacteria can enter and start doing damage to the trees. So you want to clean those up with nice cuts. And even shrubs can have been damaged. Deciduous trees and shrubs that are just starting to grow out, this is a good opportunity to see places where they're not growing out, and maybe trim back to where you have live buds. And things that have been harmed in any frost, you can do the same thing now. As they start to grow out, you'll see what's been hurt by the frost, and you can trim back to good live tissue. And I think we're safe now to prune out the frost damaged things. Unlikely to have any more frost this season. Then it's a matter of doing a little bit of soil work with your established plants, or in areas where you're going to be planting new ornamental or vegetable type plantings. You want to start thinking about getting the soil ready. I took my my meat thermometer out this morning and plunged it into the ground, and it was about 45 degrees, my soil here in Marin. And that's good and bad. Obviously our soil doesn't freeze here. We don't have to worry about that. But 45 is pretty cold for a lot of things that want to grow and flourish for us during the summer. And so it's just something to keep in mind, that the soil warms up relatively slowly. And though our night temperatures now are getting closer to 50 rather than below 50, it's going to take the soil quite a while to warm up. So when we talk about things like vegetables or summer annuals, we'll want to kind of keep not only the air temperature, but the soil temperature in mind when we're thinking about them. Woody shrubs and trees, we really don't have to worry about that. They're not going to be harmed by a little bit of cool soil. But more delicate, especially very fleshy plants, we do want to think about that. And we'll talk about it a little more. Soils around the Bay Area are highly variable. If you live out in the avenues in San Francisco, your underlying soil is very sandy. That was all sand dunes before the houses were built. There are pockets that have very heavy clay. There are areas where in the old days creeks overflowed regularly, and you have some nice silty loam soil, as though you lived along the Nile. and kind of everything in between. Soils are made out of different sized particles. Clay is very, very fine and packs together very densely. Sand, there's large chunks that don't pack together and have lots of air in them. And silt is the kind of the medium-sized particle. And we say if we make the soil triangle where we have sand and clay and silt, and then go up the triangles to mix the different particles together, kind of right in the middle, or a little below the middle, is what we call loam, which is kind of the ideal soil. It has some sand, some silt, some clay, and then for growing things, we always want some organic matter in the soil as well. This is decomposing vegetation, basically, that provides food for bacteria and fungi, which break it down even further into components that plants can absorb and use to help grow. And so when we say compost, we're talking about partially decayed vegetation, which is ready to feed the flora and fauna in the soil to get ready to feed the plants. Really, clay soils are very difficult to work when they're wet. If as a kid you made mud pies and kind of splatted the gushy mud out, onto the sidewalk or whatever, and it just kind of went splat, that's kind of what a wet clay soil is like. And you can actually make a heavy clay soil worse by working it when it's too wet. So I always want to tell people to be patient if they feel that their soil is clayey, and you can kind of tell by just gushing it between your fingers. The way the soil people do it, they actually put it in their mouth, and the clay just sort of disappears. The silts you can feel on your teeth, and the sand is big and noticeable. But if you're largely clay and it just kind of is really slippery in your fingers, and if you gush it like this and it just sort of squeezes out between your fingers, you want to wait until it dries out some before you try to work it. And this can be a little frustrating because you want to get out there and do it. But you can make it quite a bit worse. What will happen is if you dig in it and tromp around on it when it's really wet, you'll actually pack it down even denser. And when it dries out, it'll end up being more like an adobe brick than like soil that you can really use. And so it should be dry to the point where if you take a scoop of it and throw it down on that sidewalk, it breaks apart into noticeable pieces. It gets to that point, then you are safe to dig in it and to mix more organic matter in it and make the texture even better for your plantings. Long-term, mulch is very good for clay soils. It will slowly get incorporated down into the soil by the soil organisms, and also slowly leach humic acids into the soil that will help its texture. So kind of go out sometime and take a feel of your soil when it's wet. See if you can feel different sizes of particles, slipperinesses, grittinesses, and get an idea of what it's like. Most houses, certainly in housing developments, the first thing the developer does is go through and bulldoze out all of the topsoil, unfortunately. And they generally don't keep it and then carefully put it back when they're finished building the houses. They truck in some kind of soil, nobody knows where it came from, and lay it down. And so it's really impossible for you to assume that you have a certain kind of soil, or that you even have the same soil that your neighbor has in the first couple feet that got scraped off. Yeah, just don't make assumptions. Do a little, feeling around and try to work with your soil. The good news is adding organic matter to any type of soil improves it for purposes of cultivating plants. So that's rule number one, add organic matter to soil. Now, if you have an area that's kind of undeveloped or that you want to redevelop, say you're going to take a lawn out, or you've moved into a place and it's something that you want to change, some planning is helpful. And I want to give a pitch for the slope design department, which does a very nice job of going in. They can identify what you've got, help you organize your thoughts about it, and then do as much or as little planning, drawing, that sort of thing as you want. It can be a helpful resource for you. Likewise, the slope website has been getting better and better in terms of information, gardening information available to you. So I encourage you, look under the Learn tab on the slopegardens.com website, and you'll find lots of very useful information. In containers, spring is a time to refresh the soil. You're probably going to be putting some new plants in. And so if you're going to completely replace the plants, what I like to do is knock the soil out of the container completely, kind of get the old big roots out of it, and then mix some fresh potting soil into it, and make sure you mix it up really well. Don't just layer different soils on top of each other. Mix them together, and add some fertilizer that's going to last for a long time and that you can get down in the root zone by adding it to the soil. We pitch Sure Start as a beginning fertilizer. It's a nicely balanced fertilizer, and you can see here it says it is 4-6-2. That's percentages of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Those are the major nutrients that all plants need to help them grow. And Sure Start is also loaded up with beneficial fungi and bacteria that help with the interface between the soil and the plant's roots, kind of like little messengers that take the nutrients from the soil and help it cross into the roots of the plant. So that's a good one to start out with. Any of the balanced fertilizers. This is a bag of the tomato vegetable food, which is 4-5-3. If the numbers are more or less even within a couple numbers of each other, I call that balance, as opposed to something that says like 0-10-10. That's not balanced. That has 0 nitrogen and lots of phosphorus, potash. But you want some nitrogen and some of the other 2 elements at the beginning stages. So mix, according to the directions, mix some of this into your refreshed potting soil. And even if you're starting with new potting soil, I recommend adding some fertilizer. It's never going to hurt the plant, and the best place to put the fertilizer is down where the roots are. You can always add it from the top, but it's never as effective as when you have it down in the soil. So you get it in there from the get-go. There are specialty fertilizers for things like azaleas, camellias, rhododendrons, gardenias, blueberries. They would be like an acids mix like this, or there's an EB stone equivalent that starts talking about azaleas on it. There are specialized citrus fertilizers, and they may or may not have iron in them. This one does, but if they don't have iron in them, then you want to supplement with some form of iron. This is a solid form that you just sprinkle on and slowly waters in, and it adds a little bit of acidity as well as some iron. So I recommend springtime now, and then in the fall twice a year for adding iron if you're not getting enough from the fertilizer. This is a time when you're going to have to get out and do some exercise if you're gardening a large area outside. And I don't know, I did this last year, but I think it's worth just looking at the tools of the trade, which I've stacked up over here a little bit. A good quality shovel is sort of the basic tool to have. You can do almost anything with a shovel, but its basic function is to dig down a spade's depth and then turn the soil over, basically, and chop it up a little bit. This will loosen up the soil. It will aerate the soil. It'll loosen up the weed roots so that you can pull the weeds out more easily. And it's sort of your basic tool if you want to spread some compost around, you shovel it around. The fork, and this is as opposed to a pitchfork. This is a garden fork. And you can see the tines are flat. They're not round and sharp the way a pitchfork is for pitching hay around in the barn. This fork is after you've loosened the soil with the shovel, then you can get at it with the fork and really loosen it up. And the fork is a wonderful tool for that. And you'll find that it's much quicker to use the fork rather than the shovel for the secondary pass through the soil. For getting the clods broken up and that sort of thing. And then the third tool that's handy for that kind of soil preparation, watering can, is the steel rake. And you use that for smoothing, doing that final breaking up of the clods, and grading of it.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. We have dogs passing by our window. So very handy for grading, getting things, if you have a high end and you want to pull some of the soil down to the low end, this is the tool for doing that. And then everybody should have a watering can. And it doesn't have to be fancy. You can spend several $100s on a copper watering can from Hawes in England if you want to. But any watering can will do. Generally, the large watering cans hold about 2 gallons of water. And you want it to have a rose. That's what spout is called. And the rose, usually when you see the watering can, the rose is on like that. And if you were to water anything, you would end up watering your feet if the rose was pointed like that. So you always want the rose to be pointed up so that the water actually comes up and then down gently and waters your new seedlings or your just planted plants. Very handy. Eventually you'll lose the rose and then you'll end up figuring out how to water without it. But as long as you have it, it's a very handy part of the watering can. So those are kind of the basics. If you have a huge area, you might want to rent a rototiller, although rototillers are really too rough. They kind of beat the soil into submission. So you might want to do it once, but then plan on a no-till system after that, where you add lots of mulch and organic matter on top of the soil that percolates down and makes the soil texture better.
I like a good trowel too, just a hand trowel.
A trowel is a real
Oh, yeah.
important basic tool. Other important basic tools are some kind of a nozzle for your hose. This one has, I think, like 8 or 9 different settings on it, from a jet blast to a fine mist, and kind of every shape imaginable in between. I usually use the shower setting or the rain setting, depending on what the nozzle says on it. And it's just kind of a gentle flow spray that's usable for just about any kind of watering. So a nozzle is important. And another basic tool for the garden is a pair of shears, pruning shears, whether you go whole hog and get the fancy Velcros, or you go starter and get the Barnells. They're all going to work just fine. You can sharpen any of them if you need to, or take it down to the knife sharpener guy and have him do it. Just depending, if you're a person who loses things out in the garden right and left, then don't invest in the Velcros. But if you're somebody who is going to keep the tool for the rest of your life, they're a great investment. Also, I love these Coronas, which for people getting to a certain age like me, have this ability to have a longer handle with a little more leverage. So you can either put the handle back and use it as a hand pruner, or you can get at things with 2 hands, and it's really a wonderful little invention. They've been around a few years now, and I like to show them to people because a lot of us are getting to that stage of life where we don't quite have the hand strength we once had. For larger, if you're going to lop off a branch that's that big in diameter, then you want more of a lopper with some longer handles with more leverage, and that'll work fine. Or even a small pruning saw. There are folding pruning saws that you can cut the larger branches with. One of my absolutely favorite tools in all the world is this style hoe, which once you've prepared your garden, if you're going to be planting things with root balls about this size, with this guy, it's just a whack, put it in and shove it back in, and you've got it planted. And these are terrific. They're also really good for weeding later on in the season, and those little guys start to sprout up.
Plus, it looks cool.
And they look very cool. Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, moving right along. Springtime is when we start planting the plants that are going to bloom through the summer. I've got a bunch of shrubs here that are blooming right now. That doesn't mean they're going to bloom through the summer, but the bedding plants will. So, for instance, I have some marigolds here and some alyssum, and the marigolds have just recently started to show up in the nurseries because it's now warm enough for them, and they will give you color all through the summer and into the fall, as will the alyssum. And I strongly recommend that everybody plant alyssum. Tuck it into wherever you can find a spot for it, a sunny spot. Alyssum is one of the best plants for attracting beneficial insects that will help keep the load of aphids and that sort of pesty insects under control. And they're used widely in agriculture to grow between rows of cultivated vegetable plants, and they've done quite a bit of research to show that they're super effective at attracting the kinds of insects that keep the pesty insects at bay. So highly recommended. Marigolds like this are not going to do that quite so much. You can see how these have been developed to have these big roundy flowers where all of the area in here that would have been pollen has become little petals. So there's not much here for insects to be interested in terms of the pollinator type insects. But if you can find flowers that are simpler, more flat, they'll tend to attract pollinators to your garden as well. So we can start to plant marigolds, alyssum. We can continue to plant calendulas. The ranunculus here are in full bloom now and will continue for a month or so and give you spectacular color until some of the later summer flowers start to come through. Snapdragons will go right through the summer and into fall and are very reliable throughout the Bay Area. They're an annual, so you have to plant them again next year. But they're long flowering annual in a whole host of colors that are wonderful to use. I put together a cart of sort of shady flowering plants over here, shady in the sense that they like to grow in the shade, not that they're unvirtuous in any way. But you can see the azaleas are starting to come on strong up here. There are shades of azaleas from white through pinks, bright red, salmon, purple, and there are some that do better in more sun. They're called southern indicas, and there are others that do better in more shade. This is an azalea relative called pyrrhus, or lily of the valley shrub, because its flowers look like the lily of the valley bulb. But it's a really pretty evergreen shade shrub that will grow up around here, grows up about 4 to 6 feet. If we were in Oregon or Washington, they could get 12 or 15 feet. It's just that much wetter there, more humid. There's different shades of bacopa, the blue, the pink, the white, for kind of a ground, I would say a medium ground cover, maybe 6 to 8 inches tall. Very successful around the Bay Area. English primroses, get them in now. They're going to continue until the weather warms up in late May, June, and then they're going to back off. And if they don't get much water, they'll even go dormant and then come back usually in the fall when it rains. Or if they get water, they'll just kind of sit there quietly, nice and green, and then start to bloom next late fall, early spring. But really good to get in now. There's a good selection of them in your local garden center. This is a time to think about begonias if you're thinking a little more exotically. This is kind of an amazing one. But these Riger begonias down here, you'll see now. And then they'll disappear out of the nurseries because they don't bloom during the long days of summer. They only bloom in short days. And then they'll often start to bloom again in the fall if the weather's cooperative. And they can play nicely with impatiens. And it's now warm enough to put impatiens in. And of course, they go all summer into the fall and just bloom like crazy. And if you have a shady area, they are just a mainstay for shade. Also, fibrous begonias. I didn't bring any on this cart, but fibrous begonias are excellent for shady spots where you want a lower plant. So that's just kind of a idea that just because the area is in the shade doesn't mean that you can't have a lot of color and spruce it up for the spring. to look really sharp.
It's so fun. It's really pretty.
Yeah, so they make a great combination. You got some bright colors, you got some pastels, and different shapes of flowers. And most of the purists that you see won't be weeping like this. These are just so heavily budded with flowers that they're bending the branches over. Generally speaking, it'll be a more upright shrub, and probably this one will be too. Once it gets a couple of years growth under its belt, it won't be quite this heavy, but this was kind of an amazing look for the purists. I wanted to mention we get bare root roses in December usually, and one of the reasons that we don't really sell them bare root anymore, but get them put in containers immediately, is that with the climate the way it is, they start growing right away. And so even though this came in completely dormant in mid-December, it's not even mid-March yet. And not only has it leafed out, but it's made flowers already. This is a little bush rose. It's what they call a rose that's grown on its own root. So it's just grown from a cutting, and has the roots come out of the stem, and then they plant it rather than grafting it onto a rootstock. So they grow a little quicker than the grafted ones do, but it's just an indication. We don't sell them bare root because they start to grow and they're not in a medium that way. And by the time we get to the last ones, they're, by the time you plant them, you're breaking the roots. And it's difficult to keep them in good shape. So we just have them potted up immediately while they're dormant, and then they're ready to go anytime. So there you see a formerly bare root rose. Rock roses aren't true roses at all. They're a shrub that's extremely drought tolerant, extremely deer resistant, likes the sun. There are many varieties that can go from almost ground cover flat to about 4 feet tall, mounding, rounded, really, really nice plants, disease free practically. And they can do a foundation job in your garden that's hard to match with many other plants. Behind it, this Tuscan blue rosemary here is being spectacular right now. And you'll see most rosemaries are blooming now. There are many different varieties, and they can do a nice foundation job from growing more as a ground cover up to about knee height to getting up 4 or even 5 feet, and having the additional benefit that you can use it in your spaghetti sauce or whatever. I wanted to talk just a little bit about vegetables and herbs. Last year when we did getting ready for spring, it was all about vegetables and herbs, and that webinar is still on our website. You can look at it. So I'm not going to repeat what's on there. Well, some of what's on there, but we're right at that transition stage now between the cold weather vegetables and the warm weather vegetables, and the transition will last into April. By May, you should be planting only the warmer weather plants. The cool weather plants, the broccolis and cabbages and that sort of thing, should be planted between now and about the middle part of April, end of April. And then they can be overlapped with the warmer weather plants, depending on your microclimate and the way you grow them. We are starting to get tomatoes in. This is early for tomatoes. I recommend to people, if you're going to buy tomatoes now, you don't put them in the ground. that 45 degrees is anathema for tomatoes. But you put them in a container, maybe a 1 gallon size container that the sun can shine on and warm up during the day. And they'll do much better growing for several weeks in that container and then being transplanted into the ground when they're bigger and stronger and the ground's a little warmer. And the sun will be a little warmer too. I like to tell people to get the tomatoes that you like, the varieties that you like when you see them, because they might not be back, you never know. But then, have a plan in place to grow them for a while to get them ready to go into the ground. It's a little early still for peppers. They may start to be available, but they need even warmer conditions than tomatoes. And eggplants even warmer than that. And squash and cucumbers, you should wait a while on those until things warm up a little bit. I think we're going to be doing.
I was just gonna say.
We're going to be doing a class on tomatoes and one on peppers and one on squash and cucumbers and the like. And so, be patient and kind of follow our lead, but we're talking about things at the time when you should be worrying about them. Usually, somebody who plants a little later in the season, whatever they plant is going to catch up to whatever somebody plants very early in the season. And the plants that are planted very early in the season are much more vulnerable to getting sick and not doing well. So just have a little patience because the weather will perk up and the plants will be there. There are lots of herbs that you can plant year round, including now, but they don't include basil, which is the one people ask about the most. I was just down at one of our growers looking at one of their huge greenhouses full of basil. So it's coming, but it's not quite time for it yet. And if you find some and buy it now, grow it indoors. It's not going to be happy outside in this kind of temperature range. Once the nights are reliably over 50, it'll probably do fine. It also doesn't like to be soggy. Likes to be moist, but doesn't like to be soggy. So make sure the soil is kind of light for the basil. A good quality potting soil, or eventually, if you plant them outdoors, lots of organic matter in the soil for the basil. The hardier herbs, which are all the woody herbs like thyme and sage, oregano, they're fine to grow even through the winter. And you can put new fresh ones in now and have a great summer crop. Or cut back your old ones and see, if they don't push out some nice fresh new growth. Parsley and cilantro don't mind the cold weather, but they're what we call biennials. The leaves grow a big crop the first season, and then the next season they want to flower. And so they put all their energy in flowering and making seeds. And although they need leaves to support that, they don't grow nearly as many leaves as they do the first season. And so you can limp your cilantro and parsley along if you want to, but you should just face reality and realize this is a 2-year plant. I get my production out of the first year. The second year, if I wanted coriander seeds, I keep the cilantro for the coriander seeds. I don't have any use for parsley seeds unless I want it to just, reseed itself everywhere. And so get some new plants and put them in. That's really the answer on those. Things like chives go dormant in the winter. And then they come back very strongly, usually for a number of years, and your child plant can get bigger and bigger and bigger, but it won't last forever. And when it starts to get smaller each year, then it's time to replace it with new ones. Let's see, other than basil,
Chives.
you'll be getting, some of the things like shiso will start to arrive, and some of the more exotic things that like Mexican tarragon, things like that only kind of come into the nursery maybe once during the season. Keep your eyes out for those. If you see them, grab them. They won't be there forever. Check back with us, check the schedule, and look in on the tomato growing class. We'll do a lot of detail on tomatoes. We'll do a lot of details on peppers in the pepper class, and cucumbers and squash, and melons for a third class. And those are the plants that you want to wait the longest for, the cucumbers, squash, and melons, because they really like warm soil. You will find beans very shortly, I think, and you can go ahead and plant some beans. Get those started, get them growing, because they can give you crops of beans throughout the entire summer, and be wonderful. Let's see, I wanted to just give a shout out for looking for fruit trees. This is a good time to plant fruit trees, and you can kind of, you get a young fruit tree, you want to be looking for structure. Talk to your nursery person about what the various ones look like that they have. Look for buds that are swelling and starting to grow. That's a good sign. Things like apples, pears, plums, if you're in a warm spot, peaches or nectarines, and citrus trees are all going to be readily available for you, and are good to plant now while the soil's still wet. Make sure that you have plans ahead for irrigating them, because they all need water during the summer. They're not plants that can go through the summer without any irrigation, and at least until they are 5 or 6 years old. So you need to have plans for that. And then when it's time to put your vegetable garden in, just make sure that you mix in plenty of flowering plants along with the vegetables. Either, plant them between the plants or right in the container if you're growing vegetables in containers. Stick some of the flowering plants in there with them, because that really will help to keep the aphids, especially aphids and scale insects, under control a little bit. One of the most common helpful insects is called a hoverfly, and you've undoubtedly seen them, but they look a lot like bees. They just fly differently, and they do a different job. But their larvae, hoverfly larvae, eat more aphids than ladybugs do anytime. It's just you can buy ladybugs, but you can't buy hoverflies. And you can buy green lacewings, which do a great job. And of course, you can buy praying mantis egg cases. Mantises are not considered by the agriculture people to be beneficial insects in the same way that, say, a ladybug is, because they will eat any other insects. So they eat the good bugs as well as the bad bugs, but they're so cool looking. And if you have kids, you definitely want them to see a praying mantis sometime. Of course, you don't want to do what I did, which was hatch the praying mantises in a little aquarium in the house with a screen on top that was too coarse to keep them in, and end up with praying mantises all over your house. But it's a good exercise then to carefully flip them up and take them outside. There are about 200 of them in a typical egg case, so you'll see them. Taylor, do we have questions?
Hey there. All right. We have a couple here and there, and you've been answering many of them as we've been going along. So thank you for that. I also really appreciate the nice wide variety of products, as well as a lot of different kinds of plants that you've been showing off. I think it really gives a good idea that, spring is a good time to really get going and start planting. And we have a lot of stuff coming in of multiple different varieties and types. So it's a really good representation of that. I had someone asking about using seeds, and just I know we have some seed talks that we've also done before. I think you've actually led some of those, but maybe this the idea of utilizing seeds inside containers or even inside other arrangements, and how you can kind of like use those as well as your planted plants together.
Right. Yeah, seeds are a great way to get plants going. Generally speaking, the smaller seeds, you'll want to start inside under sort of a controlled setting, because they're extremely hard to identify outside. And so if you sprinkle small seeds out there and they start to sprout, you don't know which ones are weeds and which ones are the ones you want to keep. Plus birds will get a certain share of them. It's much easier to grow them up to a point where you can identify them and then put them out in pots or in the ground later on. Larger seeds, seeds of, say, beans or sunflowers or peas, you can start right in the ground because the plants that grow up are such a size that you can easily identify them. You might have to protect them again from birds, squirrels, that sort of thing that might want to nibble on the fresh little seedlings. But at least they're easy to identify, and you can protect them if you need to. I think we have a webinar on the website about seed starting. It uses a particular method. There are 100 different ways to start a seed, but it does show you a particularly easy way to get them going and transplanting them and growing them up. And certainly, if you want to grow some wildflowers, I would recommend that you look at that video. Sprinkling wildflowers out in the wild is a very frustrating experience for most people. You don't end up with much in the way of wildflowers growing. The competition from the introduced weeds is so great, and the animals that will eat them before they even start to germinate is pretty intense. So generally speaking, you're better off growing them for a little while in pots, and then transplanting them out when they're a little bigger, and where you again can protect them if you need to until they get going. If they grow successfully for you for a while, they may very well reseed themselves for the next season more successfully than you could sprinkle them out and get them going the first time. It's kind of interesting, and I suppose that's because they'll find the nooks and crannies that are appropriate for them. They'll make lots of seeds, and a few of them will grow, which is what happens in nature. The vast majority don't grow, but a few do, and if they're in a beneficial spot, then they'll come back year after year. So yeah. I love growing.
Yeah, it's very good. And I think always, looking at the packets, seeing their timelines. Someone was asking about even like rosemary, how fast that would grow from seed. And some of those are a lot slower than some of the faster growing plants that we have. So it might take a little while for some more woodier plants to really get going if you're doing it from seed versus from plant. So pay attention to that. I also have some questions based around mulching and maybe some of the ideas that you might have around if mulching is more important now. I know we talk a lot about it in the fall time, but what about a springtime mulch? What do you feel about that?
Yeah, good question. My own feeling is that when the soil is really wet and cold is not the time to mulch heavily. If you're going to mulch this time of year, I keep it back around the drip line of the plant. The drip line being where the water falls and then falls off the plant around the kind of the perimeter of the plant. And I definitely don't want any mulch near the trunk of a woody plant when things are really wet like this. That just encourages fungi and bacteria to attack the trunk of the plant. But looking ahead, as the soil starts to dry out a little bit and the rainy season has come to an end, then mulch is very beneficial for keeping the soil moist and for keeping it cool. So then the mulch comes in closer to the trunk, but still, leaves 6 inches to a foot of bare soil around the trunk of a woody plant, especially. Herbaceous plants don't. If the mulch is light, like straw or bark that is relatively fine, it's not going to hurt it to touch the base of the plant. Herbaceous plants, for some reason, are designed to fend off those fungi, and most of them you can pile dirt around them and they'll just grow new roots into the dirt. But a woody plant won't do that. It'll die if you pile dirt up around the trunk. So just be a little judicious with the mulch. There's you can use straw, you can use bark, you can use a mixture of materials, leaves, compost. But you actually want the surface of the soil to dry out a little bit this time of year, if it will. And you don't need to add mulch to preserve the moisture in the soil right now. It's very wet. It needs to dry out so that some air can get in there, and the roots of plants need air just as much as they need water. Be prepared to mulch more heavily as it gets warmer and drier, and be a little judicious about it.
Nice, very much. Thank you. And I know we're coming towards the end of our little presentation here, and I want to thank everyone for all their questions and their time. And you were speaking a little bit about pests and pest control, which is really helpful. I mean, everyone's kind of dealing with different things, and different bugs will be popping up throughout the whole season, especially starting now. Someone was asking a little bit about dealing with grubs and pests inside the soil. And do you have like a quick recommendation for how you can approach that, especially going into the new season?
Grubs in lawns are quite active right now, and the way you have grubs in a lawn usually is because the raccoons come and tear up the lawn to get at the grubs. But you might, if you don't have raccoons in your neighborhood, you might find big patches, this big of lawn that are dead. With no real explanation, and that is probably grubs that are eating the roots of the lawn. The grubs are larvae of various insects, and the best way to control them is with a little worm called a nematode, and you can buy kind of nematodes in the form of a powder, in a sense, that you mix with water and just sprinkle onto the lawn, and the nematodes will attack the grubs and get rid of them. There isn't, as far as I know, any effective insecticide that one can buy anymore that will take care of grubs and lawns. So the nematodes are really the way to go. You know, more and more insect control is a matter of keeping your plants healthy. You know, keeping the right plants healthy, meaning if you can't water, get plants that don't need as much water. If you can water, you know, to the extent that you can keep them growing and healthy. They will be much less subject to insect attack that way. And then using as much biological kind of control as you can, because that's really what's more and more available. Most of the fungicides sold now, the newer ones, are bacteria that act as a fungicide. Most of the weed killers now are things like strong acetic acid, which is vinegar. Most of the things that you spray on insects are either oils or soaps these days. So, you know, the days of spraying the world with DDT, malathion, 7, and the like are gone.
Thankfully.
And yeah, thankfully. But it means you need to identify the bug, bring it in and show it to us, whatever, so that whatever you use is actually going to be effective on it. Read up the University of California at Davis has a fabulous website. You just put in UC Davis, the letters IPM, Integrated Pest Management, and you can find solutions for almost any problem that you have. And we use it. You know, if somebody comes in with something, we'll often pull up that website and see what it is they recommend to deal with it. But number one, identification. Number two, using the least environmentally difficult solution that there is to deal with the pest. If y'all have roses, you'll start, when the first rose buds come out, you'll start to notice that some of them will have holes in them. And you should look for a little red and black guy that looks like a ladybug with a long snout. That's the rose weevil. They come once a year at the beginning of the season. The best way to deal with them is to knock them into a little pan of water. Don't try to pick them up because they'll jump away from you. They won't hurt you, but they'll jump away from you. But if you can just flick them into a pan of water and drown them, that's the best way to deal with them. They only go through one generation, so after they've passed through, they won't be back until next year. And there's no effective pesticide to deal with them. So look for those. And then a little later in the season, you'll find that the leaves of the roses are starting to get skeletized, and you can look right through them. And that's the rose slug, which will be on the bottom side of the leaf and will look kind of like something between a worm and a slug. There, if sea cucumbers got small and lived on a rose leaf, that's what they look like. So those also usually only come through once, and if your leaves are already skeletized, you know, basically you can give it a little neem oil spray and get rid of the last of them, but then they'll be finished for the season. And fortunately, they don't bother the flowers, only the leaves. So keep your eyes out for aphids. Use a strong spray of water to spray the aphids off. Later in the season, when it warms up a little bit, you can get some ladybugs, and they'll stick around as long as there's something to eat, like aphids or scale. And all of that helps to, all you're trying to do is keep the load smaller. Try to keep it so that your plants aren't being overwhelmed by these guys, but plan to live with them There are other insects out there that are gonna help eat them. Birds are gonna eat the insects, and we'll all have a big happy family as a result. So
Yeah. Very nice. Well, thank you very much for all this information. I think it really does help having all these different little tips and tricks and just other stuff, understanding what the season's going to be coming up, and having our spring prep class is always a wonderful time. And so thank you, Dan, for taking